At Moraine Lake, the canyon proper terminates, although apparently continued by two lateral moraines of the vanished glacier. These moraines are about 300 feet high and extend unbrokenly from the sides of the canyon into the plain, a distance of about 5 miles, curving and tapering in beautiful lines. Their sunward sides are gardens. Their shady sides are groves, the former devoted chiefly to Erogene and Composite and Grame. A square rod containing 5 or 6 profusely flowered erogen homes of several species, about the same number of Baia and Limnoceros, and a few grass tufts, each species being planted trimly apart, with bare gravel between, as if cultivated artificially. My first visit to Bloody Canyon was made in the summer of 1869, under circumstances well calculated to heighten the impressions that are the peculiar offsprings of mountains. I came from the blooming tangles of Florida and waded out into the plant golds of the great valley of California, when its flora was as yet untrodden. Never before had I beheld the congregations of social flowers half so extensive or half so glorious. Golden composite covered all the ground from the coast range to the Sierra like a stratum of curdled sunshine, in which I reveled for weeks, watching the rising and setting of their innumerable suns. Then I gave myself up to be borne forward on the crest of the summer wave that sweeps annually up to the Sierra and spends itself on the snowy summits. At the big Tulime Meadows, I remained more than a month, sketching and botanizing and climbing among the surrounding mountains. The mountaineer with whom I then happened to be camping was one of those remarkable men so frequently meets in California, the hard angles and bosses of whose character have been brought into relief by the grinding excitements of the gold period, until they resemble glacial landscapes. But at this late day, my friend activities had subsided, and his craving for rest caused him to become a gentle shepherd, and literally to lie down with the lamb. Recognizing the unsatiable longings of my Scotch Highland instincts, he threw out some hints concerning Bloody Canyon and advised me to explore it. I have never seen it myself, he said, for I was never so unfortunate as to pass that way, but I have yet heard many a strange story about it. I warrant you will be at least find it wild enough. Then, of course, I made haste to see it. Early morning, I made up a bundle of bread, tied my notebook to my belt, and strode away in the bracing air, full of eager, indefinite hope. The plushy lawns that lay in my path served to soothe my morning haste. The sod in many places was starred with daisies and blue gentians, over which I lingered. I traced the path of the ancient glaciers over many a shining pavement, and marked the gaps in the upper forest and that told the power of the winter avalanches. Climbing higher, I saw for the first time the gradual dwarfing of the pines in compliance with climate, and on the summit discovered creeping mats of the Arctic willow overgrown with silky catkins, and patches of the dwarf Veciniseum, with its round flowers sprinkled in the grass like purple hail, while in every direction the landscape stretched sublimely away in fresh wilderness. A manuscript written by the hand of nature alone. At length, as I entered the path, the huge rocks began to close in all around their wild, mysterious impressiveness. Then suddenly, as I was gazing eagerly about me, a drove of gray, hairy beings came into sight, lumbering toward me with a kind of boneless, wallowing motion like bears. I never turned back, though often so I inclined, and so in this particular instance, amid such surroundings, everything seems singularly unfavorable for the calm acceptance of so grim a company, suppressing my fears. I soon discovered that although as hairy as bears and as crooked as summit pines, the strange creatures were sufficiently erect to belong to our own species. They proved to be nothing more formal than Mono Indians dressed in the skins of sage rabbits. But the men and women begged persistently for whiskey and tobacco, and seemed so accustomed to denials that I found it impossible to convince them that I had none to give. Accepting the names of these two products of civilization, they seemed to understand not a word of English. But I afterward learned that they were on their way to Yosemite Valley to feast a while on trout and to procure a load of acorns to carry back through the pass to their huts on the shore of Mono Lake. Occasionally a good countenance may be seen among the Mono Indians, but these, the first specimens I had seen, were mostly ugly, and most of them altogether hideous. The dirt on their faces was barely stratified and seemed so ancient and so undisturbed it might possess a geological significance. The older faces were, moreover, strangely blurred and divided into sections by furrows that looked like cleavage joints of rocks, suggesting exposure on the mountains in a castaway condition for ages. Somehow, they seemed to have no right place in the landscape, and I was glad to see them fading out of the sight down the paths. Then came evening, and the somber cliffs were inspired by the ineffable beauty of the alpine glow. A solemn calm fall upon everything. All the lower portion of the canyon was in glowing shadow, and I crept into a hollow near one of the upper lakelets to smooth the ground in a sheltered nook for a bed. When the short twilight faded, I kindled a sunny fire, made a cup of tea, and lay down to rest and look at the stars. Soon the night wind began to flow and pour in torrents among the jagged peaks, mingling strange tones with those of the waterfalls sounding far below, and I drifted toward sleep as I began to experience an uncomfortable feeling of nearness to the furred moons, monos. Then the full moon looked down over the edge of the canyon, her countenance seemingly filled with intense concern, and apparently so near as to produce a startling effect as if she had entered my bedroom, forgetting all the world to gaze on me alone. The night was full of strange sounds, and I gladly welcomed the morning. Breakfast was soon done, and I set forth an exhilarating freshness of the new day, rejoicing in the abundance of pure wildness so close around me. The stupendous rocks, hacked and scarred with centuries of storms, stood sharply out in the thin early light, while down in the bottom of the canyon, grooved and polished bosses heaved and glistened like swelling sea waves, and telling a grand old story of the ancient glaciers that poured its crushing floods above them. Here, for the first time, I met the Arctic daisies in all their perfection of purity and spirituality. Gentle mountaineers face to face with the stormy sky, kept safe and warm by 1,000 miracles. I leapt lightly from rock to rock, glorying in the eternal freshness and sufficiency of nature, and the ineffable tenderness of which she nurtures her down mountain darlings in the very fountains of storms. Fresh beauty appeared in every step, delicate rock ferns and groups of the fairest flowers. Now another lake came to view, now a waterfall. Never fell light in brighter spangles, never fell water in whiter foam. I seemed to float through the canyon enchanted, feeling nothing of its roughness, and was out in the mono levels before I was aware. Looking back from the shore of the Moraine Lake, my morning ramble seemed all a dream. There curved Bloody Canyon, a mere glacial furrow 2,000 feet deep, with smooth rocks projecting from the sidekick and braided together in the middle like bulging, swelling muscles. Here, the lilies were higher than my head, and the sunshine was warm enough for palms. Yet the snow around the Arctic willows was plainly visible only 4 miles away. In between were narrow specimens of all the principal climates of the globe. On the bank of a small brook that comes gurgling down the side of the left lateral moraine, I found a campfire still burning, which no doubt belonged to the gray Indians I had met on the summit, and I listened instinctively and moved around cautiously forward, half expecting to see some of their grim faces peering out of the bushes. Passing on toward the open plain, I noticed 3 well-defined terminal moraines, curved gracefully across the canyon streams, and joined by long splices to the 2 noble laterals. These mark the halting places of the vanished glacier, when it was retreating into its summit's shadows on the breaking up of the glacial winter. 5 miles below the foot of the moraine lake, just where the lateral moraines lose themselves in the plain, there was a field of wild rye, growing in magnificent waving bunches, 6 to 8 feet high, bearing heads from 6 to 12 inches long. Rubbing out some of the grains, I found them about 5/8 of an inch long, dark colored and sweet. Indian women were gathered it in baskets, bending down large handfuls, beating it out and fanning it in the wind. They were quite picturesque. Coming through the rye as one caught glimpses of them here and there in winding lanes and openings, with splendid tufts arching around above their heads, while their incessant chant and laughter showed their heedless joy. Like the rye field, I found the so-called desert of Mono blooming in high state of natural cultivation, with the wild rose, cherry, aster, and the delicate abronia. Also innumerable gilias, phloxes, poppies, and brush composite. I observed their gesture and the various expressions of their corollas, inquiring how they could be so fresh and beautiful out in this volcanic desert. They told as happy a life as any plant company I ever met, and seemed to enjoy even the hot sand and the wind. But the vegetation of the pass had been in great part destroyed, and the same may be said of all the more accessible passes throughout the range. Immense numbers of starving sheep and cattle have been driven out through them into Nevada, trampling the wild gardens and meadows almost out of existence. The lofty walls are untouched by any foot, and falls sing on unchanged. But the sight of crushed flowers and stripped, bitten bushes goes far towards destroying the charm of wilderness. The canyon should be seen in winter. A good, strong traveler who knows the way and the weather might easily make a safe excursion through it from Yosemite Valley on the snowshoes during some tranquil time when the storms are hushed. The lakes and falls would be buried then, but so also would be traces of the destructive feet, while the views of the mountains in their winter garb, and the ride at lightning speed down the pass through snowy falls would be truly glorious.